The House Oversight Subcommittee on Corporate Subsidies and State Investments will come to order. Will the clerk please take attendance?
Chair Cara.
Here.
Representatives Green. Bierlein.
Here.
Wagella.
Here.
Kowalsski.
Here.
Mr. Chair, you have 4 members present, a quorum.
Representative Bierlein moves to approve the minutes of the May 21st meeting. Hearing no objection, they are approved. It wasn't May 21st. The committee will go at ease. Cool. All right, today we are hearing a testimony on the Marshall Megasite. First, we are hearing from Julianne Bryant. She is a Stop the Chinese Communist Party administrator. Welcome, and please begin when you are ready.
For the opportunity to address you today. My name is Julianne Bryant. I am a resident of Marshall, Michigan, Marshall Township. This is my testimony. This is not just my story. I'm here today representing many in my community. Marshall is known to be a quaint, historic, small town with plenty of charm. It gives folks the feeling that they are in a Hallmark movie. I lived in downtown Marshall for 10 years. I owned a small business downtown and was a member of the Marshall Chamber of Commerce and a chamber ambassador. My husband and I moved back to Marshall in June of 2019. We love the Marshall vibe, the small town feel, the fact that the Rexall pharmacists knew our names. We also moved here so I could be closer to Ann Arbor. You see, I have a hereditary kidney disease and will eventually need a kidney transplant. But because of the extreme stress of this monstrosity being built less than a half a mile from our new home, my kidney function has plummeted. I was placed on the deceased kidney donor list and am actively seeking a living kidney donor. Please look out at the handout, page 1. It wasn't disclosed to us. Oh, I'm so sorry. It wasn't disclosed to us that our new home would be less than a half a mile from a proposed EV battery plant connected to the CCP, less than 12 miles away from an Air National Guard base, an Army base, Federal Center, and National Cemetery, creating a national security risk on top of the corporate welfare and environmental issues. There is so much to go over, so many meetings and facts and heartache. Let me start here. In 2011, our chamber transforms itself into the Marshall Area Economic Development Alliance, MEDA. Little did we know of the horror that this change to our Chamber of Commerce would bring to our community. The chamber changed to Marshall Area Economic Development Alliance, which I will refer to as MEDA from this point. MEDA members are unelected officials and small business owners who were handed millions of our state tax money by the Michigan Economic Development Corporation, MEDC, and Governor Whitmer. This group of individuals had never handled over $1.5 million, and now they were the recipients of hundreds of millions of dollars of our state tax money. Because they are a 5013C, we were unable to obtain any information from them on how the money was being handled, and we couldn't FOIA them either. MEDA has been making policy decisions for our city and township with no vote, no oversight, no transparency, and no accountability. In August 2020, during the COVID shutdown, Jim Durian was slid into the position of CEO of MEDA. Previously, the Chamber of Commerce, i.e. MEDA, was run by local small business owners. Mr. Durian had previously worked for the MEDC. He wasn't a Marshall resident. He wasn't a Marshall business owner. On the MEDC website, he was shown connected to an LLC called Community Ventures, PLLC. That company is an extension of, wait for it, the MEDC. Its purpose was connect unhireable people that had a lack of education, lack of functional literacy, long-term disconnection from employment, low income, ex-offenders, and at-risk youth to factory positions like the Megasite. Employers would be given a wage reimbursement grant of $5,000 per employee. So not only did the MEDC decide to give Ford millions in property and tax breaks, Ford will also collect $5,000 for each non-hireable employee. What a despicable plan approved by Governor Whitmer and all funded with our Michigan taxpayer money. Our township had a meeting on January 23rd of 2023, and the township hall was packed to over capacity. The residents were notified that the PA 425 land transfers were being voted on, but the message to the residents from the local officials was that the Megasite was a done deal and that we had better get over it. There were hours of residents speaking against the Megasite at this meeting, against what they were telling us was a done deal. It's funny that all these deals coming from Governor Whitmer's office are done with the same exact playbook. We eventually found out why we didn't know anything regarding the Marshall Megasite. The governor, some state reps, MEDA board members, our mayor, city council board, and the township board were required to sign NDAs by the MEDC, who is handling out billions of Michigan taxpayer money for corporate welfare. This left the residents unrepresented and out of the loop completely. The formerly uneventful township meetings were heating up. An elderly resident arrested in the middle of a meeting for speaking out of turn. Charges against him were eventually dropped, and it was and is sad and appalling how the residents have been treated. The Ford rep initially came to the township meeting. She was also a plant who previously worked for the MEDC. Her message, Ford wanted to be a good neighbor. Good neighbor to who? We didn't buy it. Ford had a breakfast meeting with the MEDA crew in Marshall and Chamber of Commerce and cities around us. We were told they were afraid to meet with the Marshall residents after Ford had a volatile meeting with residents in Ceresco, which is a small village that was being eliminated with this project. On February 13th, 2023, my husband and I were vacationing in Grand Turk. We couldn't get away from checking the newly created Facebook pages, and we were advised to watch the American National News. We saw our small-town mayor, Governor Whitmer, and executives from Ford announcing this irresponsible use of taxpayer money. We found it very devastating that they announced this project like it was a done deal. But in fact, all the property that was needed to complete this project was not optioned or secured. At that time, it was also announced before any public hearings had taken place. Handout number 2. A group of residents immediately organized peaceful protests at Brooks Memorial Fountain. We've gathered for over 2 years now on Saturdays and Wednesdays. We are a dedicated group. We've had as many as 70 join us and as few as 5. Our mission is to inform and educate our community of what is happening regarding the Megasite. The residents worked together and formed a few groups. We protested, attended every meeting they set for the township, city, county, fire board, airport board, MDOT, etc. We also formed a committee for Marshall, not the Megasite, comprised of 5 Marshall City residents. They circulated a petition for referendum to give residents the opportunity to vote. We needed 600 signatures. We obtained over 800. The city clerk deemed that only the people on the committee could circulate the petitions and wiped out a majority of the signatures. Committee for Marshall, not the Megasite, is currently waiting for word from the Michigan Supreme Court regarding if they will hear our case. In May of 2023, during one of these very peaceful protests, we noticed a woman handing out flyers near us, handout 3 and 4, front and back. We obtained one. It said, Don't sign the anti-Marshall petition. It said a group of angry, disgruntled residents are circulating a petition to reverse a unanimous 6-0 vote by the Marshall City Council. Then a postcard, handout number 5, was sent to all city residents. It had 5 residents' photos on it, including my husband and myself, and Mr. Adams, who is also here today. We were crossed out with a giant red X. The postcard also had red X's in red print, which read kill, block, eliminate. We viewed it as the threat that it was meant to be. We contacted local authorities and the FBI and the U.S. District Attorney for West Michigan to no avail. That same protest, a man came out at us, screaming and yelling and saying that he couldn't sleep because of all the honking that was ongoing in support of us against the Megasite. We found out that he was a local man who was hired to attack us. City residents started to receive robocalls, which told them not to sign the petition. There was also computer pop-ups with the same message: don't sign the petition. So of course we looked into it. At the bottom of the flyers it said, paid for with regulated funds by the Marshall Citizens for Jobs and Opportunities. Well, we didn't stop digging. It was uncovered that the phone number used for the robocalls was last used for Governor Whitmer's reelection campaign. Marshall Citizens for Jobs and Opportunities had received a one-time gift of $100,000 in dark money donation, which is how they were paying for the attacks on the residents. They were being represented by the law firm Clark Hill. From that firm, partner Christopher Treblecock was appointed just this April 2025 to the Court of Appeals by Governor Whitmer. Detroit Free Press ran an expose on the dark money scheme, and the harassment of the residents continued. May 2023, there was a joint planning committee meeting, 3 Marshall Township and 3 Marshall City representatives. This meeting was regarding the rezoning of the site from agricultural to heavy industrial. Their recommendation for the city council was to not change the zoning. We were ecstatic. Traditionally, the city council listens to the recommendation from this committee. The next week, they had a city council that started at 7 p.m. and lasted till 3 a.m. The room was filled to over capacity, and there were approximately 100 people who couldn't get in and couldn't speak. It was brought to the attention of the mayor that they needed to move the meeting or reschedule it. The mayor was irritated by this and asked the police to walk this handicapped man out. They threatened that if he came back onto the property, he would be arrested. This was public property. He had it all in video. The way they walked him out had us questioning what country we were living in. The city council heard hours and hours of testimony from the residents who were against this, but they ignored the will of the people and passed the zoning to heavy industrial 6-0. There are so many reasons that the residents didn't want this factory in our small town of 7,000 people. This is a national security issue. This is a corporate welfare issue. This is a huge environmental issue. Do we want to be in business with a country or business that violates human rights and spies on our military installments and whose people are sent here to specifically spy on the American people? The Department of Defense just banned the CC-connected contemporary Amprex, CATL, from doing business with our military. They deemed it's a national security issue, and CATL, which is connected to the CCP, is using slave labor. The Uyghur women and children obtain the components that are needed for these batteries. Is this what we want to support? Why would we allow CATL to do business in small, historic Marshall, since our military won't even do business with them? The danger to our environment was originally on top of the list of concerns. We watched in horror as 3,000 acres of prime farmland, beautiful 100-year-old farms and neighborhoods were literally bulldozed and destroyed.
They chopped down trees that were hundreds of years old and ran them through chipping machines. They chopped down trees along C Drive, which was highly coveted because it was such a beautiful drive, especially in the fall. The trees on C Drive were chopped down first and were blatantly lied to in a county meeting and told that they were cut down because they were too close to the road and they were going to cause accidents. But the truth came out like it always does, and they were cut down before the endangered bats would return to them in the spring. Another huge environmental issue is the fact that this property runs along 3 miles of the Kalamazoo River, which does run into Lake Michigan. The neighborhood that I live in is to the south of the Megasite on the Kalamazoo River. There's approximately 150 homes in 2 neighborhoods, and we all have wells, which we are very worried about. What will happen to our water? What will happen to our air from these very toxic components? Will I have to sell my dream home just to survive? The only people that want this are the ones who think they or their business will benefit from this monstrosity. The public gets it. Local politicians and most of the media do not. The playbook for these are all the same. Lots of non-disclosure agreements to keep the residents in the dark until it's too late. Residents threatened to give up their property, and if they didn't, they were threatened with eminent domain. Billions of our state tax money handed out by the MEDC, who should be Michigan Doged, in my opinion. And the continual stress from all this has further damaged my health. We pray that this project will be stopped. So much suffering for dangerous factory jobs, offering people a ridiculous wage. Our hearts have been broken by the mess, destruction of land, trees, animal habitats, watching as our state tax money is wasted instead of fixing the damn roads. And the national security danger in our backyards. It has also taken away our chosen way of life in the small town that we call home. Thank you. Do you have any questions?
Yes, thank you, Mrs. Bryant, for your testimony. There certainly are a group of activists there who've been very vigilant in exposing what's going on in your community there in Marshall. If people were to go and talk to the people throughout the Marshall community, going door to door, talking with people, what would they find? Is the community in support or opposition to Blue Oval?
The community is definitely not in support. And when I say community, I'm talking about residents. Initially, there was a 100 letters provided to the city council that the mayor read at that 8-hour city council meeting. We later obtained those, and they were all form letters signed, but they were from mayors of other cities, city leaders, and people with businesses that felt that they would benefit from this in some way, including like Kellogg Community College, which is in Battle Creek. In those papers, there was not one resident that was in approving this. As of yesterday, there was an article, I believe you guys have a copy of that as well. Barry, can you hand that to me real quick? I don't have a copy of it. Yeah. No, okay, I'm sorry. You guys have a copy of it right there. It came out yesterday. Basically, it was a news, it was in the news, and it said that 100 community leaders, businesses wrote a letter they do not want the tax incentives to be taken away from this Ford project. Bill Ford has already made videos, expressing that if they don't get these, that the project could be stopped.
These letters that were written from business owners in the community, do they seem heartfelt and well written, as if this was coming from them personally, or did they seem like a form letter that just copy and paste, repeat?
They were all form letters. every single one of them. Same exact wording, just a signature and,
So these weren't the business owners using their own words to show their support for it?
No,
coming to
sir.
Who, do you know who helped them write those letters?
we believe that Maida had put that together.
Okay. Thank you. Another question I have for you is, you mentioned the postcards had pictures of people from the community with that X through it. Do you think that there was any intention behind that, with having people from the community with your faces on their postcards?
Yes, we felt that they were trying to intimidate us as the residents. It's the last page. It's kind of blurry because it was a small piece. There was a lot of other people in that picture, just like the one that you guys saw with all the people standing in front of the fountain, but they chose a very specific section of people that are standing up for the community. My husband, myself, Barry Adams, and there was 2 other ladies that were in that picture as well, but we felt that was very calculated and meant to intimidate us.
Looks like we have a question from Minority Vice Chair Wagella.
First, thanks for being here. I've been fighting against corporate subsidies since I've gotten into office up here. And I think for me, it's never okay for us to give public tax dollars to private corporations. And I'm curious about a couple things. One, do you get the sense that the community would have been opposed regardless of the company and the situation? So let's say another investor of a similar size is coming to create some kind of other factory that's not the EVs. Would the community still have reacted in the same way? And then 2, I think one of the most concerning things that we saw with Marshall is the use of dark money funds connected to elected officials who have instead of just going out there and saying to the community, hey, I want this, et cetera, found kind of different ways to get their message out. And I wonder if you can talk a little bit about more how that made it challenging as just a community organizer to organize people in your area. Because I think it's the use of dark money in our politics is terrifying what it could be used for. And this is, I think, an example of where this could lead.
Yes, sir. I think we would rather have anything over in that area opposed to a EV battery plant with dangerous components. This sits upon our watershed. It runs along 3 miles of a Kalamazoo River. There are plenty of things. We had hopes for possibly a county park in that area because it's a beautiful area. I'm not exactly sure, 2011, that same section of the river was Enbridge Corporation. We had a huge oil spill. 800,000 gallons of oil was spilled in that area. They built a small area for people that want to kayak and so forth. In order to get to my home on a Saturday or a Sunday, this little parking lot is to overfill, and there's so many cars on the road on both sides of people enjoying, the water, the Kalamazoo River, that we have to be very carefully wind through them to get back to our neighborhood. So, that would have been perfect. That would maybe have brought the right kind of people and the right kind of, like let's say you have some camping, let's say you have nature trails, let's say you have, a parking lot room for kayaking, all that kind of good stuff for, the people to enjoy the water.
And then,
That would have brought people to town to buy groceries, to purchase,
So fair to characterize that the community maybe is opposed to a giant industrial site there, right? They'd rather be something else. And then with the second question, if I may, Chair, I just talk about how difficult it is. I imagine your community group doesn't have hundreds of thousands of dollars to spend on a campaign, right? Promoting or opposed to the Marshall site. And I think, as you mentioned, I think the Free Press article, I think it's really interesting and I encourage people to read it, that there was a $100,000 effort to kind of sway the community in support of the project, which I think should be concerning for all of us that the politically connected, et cetera, regardless of party, could create an operation like such.
We feel that that $100,000 dark money campaign was to attack the residents. And really, what it did instead is it was making people so mad. They were getting these robocalls. They were getting pop-ups on their computer screen. They were being hit from all over, and it was making these people so mad. They said, well, we weren't, we had contemplating signing the petition, but we're not going to have these people telling us what to do. Can we come and sign your petition? And they were seeking us out. So we got, like I said, over 800 signatures. We only needed 600. But then our city clerk got involved and deemed that most of them were not usable because they weren't collected by the 5 committee members for the Marshall Committee for Marshall, not the Megasite.
Another question I have for you is, what connection does this project have to the Chinese Communist Party?
Okay, so what we have learned is CATL, Contemporary Amprex, is a Chinese EV battery maker, and as all Chinese companies are connected to the CCP. They are using slave labor. They are using companies that use slave labor. We know that they come, we've had all the reports in the news about the college students and what's going on. Their mission, or they're sent here, maybe not their personal mission, but they are sent here that they are supposed to be spying on us. People say, well, they want to, bring this technology to the United States so that we're making the batteries. But if they're bringing in the equipment and they're running everything, let's face it, they're not going to give up their secret. They're going to continue to stay there and be in charge of the sections of the technical. Okay, that's not something that they're going to plan to give to our local, to the Ford Motor Company. They plan to stay involved. They're not going to give up their secrets. So this isn't like an eventually, Ford will be able to make their own batteries. That's not how it's going to work.
Okay, thank you. It looks like we have one more question from Vice Chair Green. Okay. All right. Seeing no further questions, thank you for your testimony, Mrs. Bryant.
Thank you all for your time today.
All right, and next we are hearing testimony from Mr. Glenn Kowalski, Marshall Township Treasurer. Welcome, and please begin your testimony when you're ready.
Good morning, Chairman and members of the Oversight Subcommittee. My name is Glenn Kowalski, Marshall Township resident and treasurer. Thank you for the opportunity to speak with you today on a matter of deep concern to our community, the development of the Marshall Megasite. I'm going to try to, in a short period of time, take you through roughly 3 years of overreach by the state of Michigan and some local bad actors. This story begins not with public dialogue or open planning, but with secrecy. In 2019, the Marshall Area Economic Development Alliance, MEDA, in Calhoun County quietly applied for over $500,000 in state grants to plan for water infrastructure and site readiness for the megasite. These were outward-facing efforts disguised by their silence, not publicly released, not discussed in town halls, not printed in newsletters. The grants were awarded by the Michigan Economic Development Corporation, MEDC, to MEDA in Calhoun County for the preparation and to determine the adequate water source for the Marshall Megasite, all done with limited public disclosure. At the same time, from 2020 through 2022, Marshall Township Master Plan underwent a sweeping overhaul. dramatically expanding areas zoned for industrial use. The Marshall Megasite's future industrial land use was increased from the 700 acres that had been for decades to 1,200 acres, and then ultimately to 2,000 acres within the Marshall Township boundary. The Planning Commission that developed this new plan included 2 directors from the MEDA board. One trustee, Bob Ling, that admitted signing an NDA. The other, a lawyer, Richard Lindsay, who authored the land purchase options during the same time period. Reportedly, all members of the MEDA board are required to sign NDAs. All of this happened behind closed doors, and here's why. Non-disclosure agreements. NDAs were signed by members of the Battle Creek City Council, Emmett Township Supervisor, Marshall City Council and staff, Marshall Township Planning Commissioners, and the Township Board members, and even some of our state representatives and senators. The people elected to represent us were legally bound not to speak to us. An MEDC project manager candidly stated that rural agricultural land, like that around Marshall, was far easier to develop than in cities like Detroit, Flint, or Benton Harbor. In other words, the plan was never to revitalize struggling cities, it was to bulldoze rural Michigan. Despite the secrecy, truth has a way of surfacing. By late 2022, rumors began circulating around a 3,000-acre industrial development in Marshall Township and Emmett Township. Concerned citizens, including myself, began asking questions, excuse me, and forming coalitions. We raised funds through a grassroots nonprofit, $24,000 from small donors. We showed up in force at local meetings, like the January 26, 2023 Marshall Township Board meeting, where PA 425 land transfers were executed, transferring the Megasite land jurisdiction to the city of Marshall without public consent. An overcapacity crowd attended our town hall that evening and commented against the land transfers until almost 11 p.m. A requested referendum, an option by statute, was not allowed. It wasn't until February 2023, after months of FOIA requests, that Calhoun County finally released over 6,000 pages of planning documents revealing the scope of what had been hidden from the local public. March 30th, 2023, at Bob Ling, a Marshall Township trustee and MEDA board member, Truth and Clarity hearing for a recall petition, Chris Treblecock, remember that name, an attorney funded by over $7,000 in Lansing and Detroit area contributions, tried to undermine a local recall. He failed twice. In April 2023, we got wind of a giant water supply project from Battle Creek. The utility manager and survey workers told us what was happening. However, the city council refused my FOIA request for information, even on appeal. Now we know that this was to hide the project and the fact that the city of Marshall did not have the capacity to supply the Megasite, which is part of the Master 425 Development Agreement with Marshall Township. On April 25th, 2023, the Joint Planning Commission, JPC, formed specifically for PA 425 transfers and comprised of members from both the Marshall Township and City of Marshall Planning Commissions, voted against rezoning the land for industrial use 4-2. Per the formal Master 425 Development Agreement, the JPC, quote, shall control all land usages for land subject to a 425 agreement, unquote. It makes sense, right? The land usage under an agreement should be shared. However, on May 1st, 2023, an overflow crowd packed the Marshall City Council meeting, which ran until 3 a.m. the next day. Despite overwhelming opposition, the rezoning was approved against the JPC vote unanimously and without comment. That included a last-minute appropriation. That kind of maneuver is virtually unheard of. A zoning change needs no appropriation. It's a zoning change. That's not democratic governance, that's manipulation. City of Marshall citizens then exercised their democratic rights through a petition drive for a referendum under the City of Marshall Charter. Yet these efforts were met with resistance, not just from MEDA and MEDC, but also from a petition committee formed, Marshall Citizens for Jobs and Opportunity, MCJO, funded with $100,000 of dark money exposed in a Detroit Free Press investigation. They tried robocalls, pamphlets, degrading and dangerous postcards, and Facebook ads to stop the petition drive. They failed. The petition drive collected 810 signatures in less than 30 days. Only 570 were needed. After this huge petition effort brought by its citizens, the City of Marshall rejected the petition outright. The Citizens for Marshall, not the Megasite, CMNM, petition committee then sued the City of Marshall, and in response, MEDA, MEDC, Ford, and MCJO tried to bury them in legal costs, all trying to intervene in the lawsuit. Only MEDA was allowed in by the retired judge brought in by Calhoun County District Court. And yet, CMNM persisted with over $155,000 raised by local citizens and hours of pro bono work. The case now sits with the Michigan Supreme Court. Then MCJO, represented by Chris Treblecock, remember that name, filed a lawsuit against the petition committee with foolish claims. And still, twice weekly, our community gathers and protests at the Michigan Fountain Circle. We will not be silenced. The environmental toll of this project is staggering. Over 2,000 acres of prime farmland and rural homesteads have been razed, soon to be 3,000. The development sits along the fragile Kalamazoo River, still recovering from a 1 million-gallon oil spill in 2010. Soil erosion violations have already been documented by Eagle. Fines have been issued. 200-year-old trees have been ripped out and turned into mulch. Concrete dust, dirt, and trash now pollute our air and our neighborhoods. This isn't economic development, it's ecological destruction. This project was never about what our community wanted. We are a small town. We chose rural life deliberately, but our voices were not heard. The small town feel, low crime, friendly Marshall will never be the same. The Megasite will be larger than Mackinac Island and almost as large as the city of Marshall itself. Marshall will become a suburb of an industrial complex like many of the other large auto plant areas. As all the above progressed, 3 of us in Marshall Township decided to try to make a change in our local government. As another testimony to the lack of trust in our board, public opinion on the Megasite, and the need for change, the 3 of us were elected overwhelmingly in November of 2024. We hope to make progress by reducing the impact of the damage the state of Michigan has brought to our area. In conclusion, let me be blunt. the state of Michigan used taxpayer money to destroy the very community it claims to protect. Worse, it did so in secret through NDAs, backroom planning, and legal intimidation. The state infiltrated our local government, silenced our planning commissions, and weaponized grants to push through a project the people never wanted. And for what? A company, Ford, that is publicly uncertain about even moving forward with the plant, dependent on ongoing tax incentives, and facing fierce supplier competition. Remember the UAW contract. All of this with the backdrop of working with a Chinese company known to the U.S. government to be tied to the Chinese Communist Party and blocked from doing business with the Pentagon. What a great partner to have, and pay dearly for technology that could have been developed here instead of producing outrageous profits. Meanwhile, our lawsuit fighting for the right to vote on what happens to our own land sits at the Michigan Supreme Court. We don't ask for special treatment, we ask for fairness, transparency, and respect for the citizens of this state. Michigan should not need to bribe companies to do business here. We should focus on lowering taxes, fixing infrastructure, and empowering local communities to shape their own futures. This $1 billion in taxpayer dollars could have been used to improve our failing local road systems and not to benefit a highly profitable corporation. And finally, Chairman and members of the committee, let me say this plainly. It is an insult to our democratic process that the governor's own lawyer, Chris Treblecock, remember that name, was deployed to suppress our citizens' recall and petition drives. And now that very same Chris Treblecock sits on the Michigan Court of Appeals, appointed without prior judicial experience by Governor Whitmer in April. We deserve much better. Thank you.
Thank you for
Welcome
your
any questions.
Yes, thank you for your testimony. We certainly do deserve much better. And while we're on the topic of Mr. Treblecock, he is the attorney who represented Gretchen Whitmer when she was telling us all to stay home and stay safe, traveled down to Florida to visit with her dad. She also has this guy who she's really close with, Mr. Treblecock, who represented Jim Chapman with Goshen up in the Big Rapids area. And the same attorney was down there working in cahoots with this corrupt process in your community in Marshall. And now Gretchen Whitmer gives him an appointment to be a judge here in the state of Michigan. Do you see any problems with this?
Definitely. I mean, I think just the fact that I was shocked when he showed up at a truth and clarity hearing, which is usually a fairly simple hearing in a recall, was shocking. But to see him part of the effort to stop the movement against the Megasite was unbelievable to me.
Absolutely. Well, thank you. It looks like we have a question from Vice Chair Green.
It's more of just okay, I just want you to walk me through. I'm sorry, I've been really sick, so I'm not my normal awesomeness. Well, just reality. You're the current treasurer, correct?
Correct.
But you just got elected.
November 20.
Okay, and the reason, and I served on local government, so this is why I'm just trying to track with my brain right now.
Sure.
You got elected, so because of what happened, the entire board was overturned through a local election.
Three of the 5 board members were replaced, yes.
And is that because the other 2 didn't sign NDAs?
Our supervisor was against the Megasite, and there was no one to run against the clerk.
Oh, okay, fair. And so I guess, has he expressed when he was a supervisor, and I know when the state came in to do this, did they sit down with them and talk to them all about this? Do you
Not that I'm
know?
aware of.
Okay.
again, we had one trustee who was replaced, Bob Ling, who was on the board of MEDA, who would have known all of this but could not share it with the rest of the board or the planning commission that he was part of.
Because he signed an NDA.
Because he signed in.
Do you know what the consequence of breaking that NDA was? Like, did you ever have a chance to see
We
it or
do
talk
have
to it?
copies of them, but I don't know that offhand.
Okay, I'm just, I guess I'm just trying to put myself in your position as a local elected official, and it does seem, it is the big government coming in and telling you what to do with your community, with what your area, with these promises of jobs, and because that can get exciting at times when, especially if you're, I live in kind of the middle of nowhere, but I'm still a little bit close to Detroit, but what I represent is kind of in the middle of nowhere, and I can see how a community would get excited of some opportunity for prosperity, but it appears from what you just told me, they wiped out your whole community, and now, from what I just recently read in the paper, Ford's not even going to do anything of that scale that they completely raised. Is that correct?
Well, Ford scaled back when electric car volumes were plummeting. They scaled back their planned employment there. I'll be surprised if the plant opens personally. But back to something you said, Marshall's a thriving community. If you were to come into Marshall today, you wouldn't think of it as anything but a thriving community. We don't have an employment problem. The city of Marshall has a millage problem because it's one of the highest millages in the state. So they've lost some residents to Marshall Township primarily. We've gained in population. So there was no need for any of this development, but definitely not something, again, the size of 3,000 acres. I mean, if you can try to picture that compared to the original proposal, let's say, of 700 acres in its totality.
I keep picturing the size of Mackinac Island now in my head,
Yeah,
of the scale of it. And so it's almost, I know we're in the, whatever committee this is, but it almost sounds like the weaponization of the government as well. Like, is that how you feel? I'm just trying to understand, as a resident of Marshall, that your government was essentially like weaponized against you. Like,
Yeah, I mean, I think the state of Michigan, and I think specifically Governor Whitmer, if you remember the time period when this all started to really accelerate, GM had left the state. It was an embarrassment to the governor. She didn't want Ford to replicate what they're doing in Tennessee and Kentucky. So this became the platform for keeping Ford in Michigan. So yeah, I mean, we haven't had any say so. We didn't know anything about it. If you'd done this the right way, you'd come to the community and you'd say, we're thinking about developing 3,000 acres of property along the river. What do you guys think? And they would have got a resounding no.
oh yeah, thank you for coming.
The 425 agreement established that the Joint Planning Commission had sole authority for land usage, and they voted 4-2 in opposition.
That's correct.
Was their decision usurped in any way?
Yes. The next council meeting, which was May 1st, the city council completely neglected that vote of the Joint Planning Commission and without discussion approved the rezoning with appropriation. And to put that into context, I mean, the whole purpose of a Joint Planning Commission under PA 425 is to bring the two parties that are in agreement together to plan the land usage, and that's contained in the agreement.
And the township lost its voice through that process when the
We
city
completely
voted
lost-
unanimously afterward.
We completely lost our voice, and that was in contrast to what we were told at the board meetings, that, oh, that's that's where Marshall Township will have a voice.
Okay, thank you. Next question from Minority Vice Chair Wagella.
Hi, thanks for testifying. And I think what's interesting about, because it was a similar story, I think, with the Goshen plant, where the local government essentially worked with the state on these. And then there was this kind of like revolution from the communities where the plants were after things had gotten so far into the process. And I think we're seeing how the communities have responded by electing different people in these positions. But I know me and the chair here worked on non-disclosure agreement, banning non-disclosure agreements for state officials. Hopefully, we'll be able to find a way to potentially do that for local officials as well. But my question is, have you had conversations with people that were elected at that time and had signed NDAs that regret it, or that you believe might have benefited from not signing those because then they could have went and talked to constituents about the project? I think that's one of the biggest dangers of the way the non-disclosure agreements are used is lawmakers or local electeds will sign them before just to learn about the project. And after you sign them, you're kind of barred from going and surveying residents without the threat of legal action. Can you talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, I'm not aware of anyone that's signed an NDA that has regretted it, except I believe Senator Albert has taken his signature back. I think Representative Leitner is trying to do the same. We're not sure why it's taking so long. I'm not aware of anyone else. I think they both, again, voted against the funding and the SOAR committee. But back to something you said, I think one of the first things we did as a community is we started to link with other communities. So at our May 1st meeting, we had people from Green Township, we had people from Detroit, we had people from Eagle Township, because we saw the commonality. Unfortunately, the Marshall deal was much deeper along than any of the others, and so I think we've had, unfortunately, less success. We even made connections with people in South Dakota and Georgia facing similar situations to get their expertise on how to try and face these. And the general consensus was it's going to cost you $250,000 to defend yourself.
Just want to make sure I have this right. We had 9 non-disclosure agreements signed by state legislators, City of Marshall elected officials, Township elected officials, and even the City of Battle Creek elected officials, because they're looking at doing business for getting the water from Battle Creek, all signing non-disclosure agreements while they're bringing this project to a community that is passionately opposed to it, using hundreds of millions of dollars, billions of dollars from taxpayers throughout the state of Michigan for a project you guys in your community don't even want yourselves.
Correct.
Is that what's going on?
Correct. Yeah, it's
Blindsided the community, using these NDAs, lacking transparency, jamming this down your throat, and we all get to pay for it.
right. And that's exactly why I'm involved. I mean, 68 years old. I didn't really choose to get involved in a reaction like this or become township treasurer, but we had to fight. I think we all felt we had to fight back, and unfortunately, the state of Michigan is a pretty significant foe.
Next question from Representative Bierlein.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and you kind of covered some of what I wanted to talk about with the 425 transfer. So we've seen the results of those actions in your own township play out through elections. Have similar results happened in the city of Marshall? Have the residents overturned their board at this point? Has that started to happen?
No, I think there were 2 challenges to the last election of council members, and they were not successful.
Okay. With the 425 agreement, we've seen these before, and you mentioned the water for that is supposed to come from the city of Marshall. That's how that works. You expand your water lines, and then you get to annex the property that it expands to as a result of the agreement. If Marshall can't meet that agreement, is that your court challenge to the Supreme Court? If they can't meet that agreement, they're going to Battle Creek to look for that water. Does that make the 425 agreement invalid?
So I'll separate that. That is not the case before the Supreme Court. The case in front of the Supreme Court speaks more to the right to petition for referendum. In terms of the 425 agreement, it's something our legal staff is looking at. It becomes difficult because the two systems have become commingled. So the water systems are commingled. So what Marshall will tell you now is that everything from 12 Mile, which is Marshall Township, all the way to Marshall is Marshall water, because they bought it at this point and they're delivering it to the Megasite. Okay. So I think, they've got, at any given time during the trial, there was 12 lawyers on the other side. So they have a lot of horsepower between Bodman and Clark Hill that have been looking at this for a long time.
If I may, Mr. Chair. The previous township board, I understand the Joint Planning Commission and that vote. Did that previous board vote to enter into a 425 agreement with the city pending the results of the Planning Commission? So like previous elected officials did at some point vote to start this process with the city? Is that accurate?
So I'm not sure I fully understand the question. There's two elements to this. There's a master 425 development agreement that was most recently signed in 2022 by the past board. That's an overarching agreement. What happened on January 26 was the beginning of individual property transfers that were done by the past Marshall Township Board. All of the members voted for it with the exception of our supervisor who voted no.
Okay. I think I'm okay for right now.
Another question I have for you, I have a memory of this property being prepared for decades, over half of a century, for some type of massive project. Maybe they didn't know exactly what the plan was, but can you speak towards any type of preparation that was being done where people in the community would have had no idea that there was this type of plan, but they were preparing for a big project, whatever it may end up ultimately being, for over half of a century?
Yeah, so I think what you're referring to is approximately 700 acres in Marshall Township in what's now currently the Megasite. It was called the Gerholtz property, and sometime in the 50s, the zoning map was changed to light industrial. However, when we went and searched the Marshall Township records, there are no records that they can show that the Township Board approved rezoning of that land. That land was subsequently sold to Cirrus Farms, which is a land a company that acquires land for future sale. And so I think there's been a picture that something was going to happen on that 700 acres for quite some time, and there's a list of companies that have looked at the land. The hurdle was always water and sewer. But it was I've never ever heard of anyone talking about 2,000 acres, or in this case, ultimately 3,000 acres. That became part of the Megasite, right? Megasite means 1,000 plus acres, right? Well, 700 acres isn't going to get it. The state of Michigan wasn't going to spend the money, the $1 billion, to put in the infrastructure to redo I-69 Michigan Avenue for 700 acres.
Good. Next question from Minority Vice Chair Wagilla.
You're the treasurer for the city, correct? Is that
For the Marshall Township.
Yes. A question I have, and I think this doesn't get talked about enough. We talk a lot about the state dollars that support these projects, but in a lot of cases, there's also local agreements as part of that package for local tax abatements that, of various levels. So I was wondering if you could talk a little bit about the local tax abatements that were part of this deal and how that's negatively going to affect the surrounding community, because one of the tangible benefits of having a massive factory, you would think, would be that you'd have a bigger tax base to use for city services, et cetera. And in a lot of these cases, there are years' worth of abatements that prevent the cities from actually seeing those benefits.
So originally, I think the state of Michigan had stepped in and made this Renaissance zone. When Ford reduced the size of their investment, the state reduced their commitment as well, and it fell back on the local authority, which was the city of Marshall. The 425 development agreement contains a pass-through to Marshall Township of 4 mills, which would be a good thing. Our current millage is roughly, including our fire, is probably like 3.4 mills. Unfortunately, the City of Marshall's track record is, for all companies, is a 50% tax abatement, which they approved for Ford Motor Company. So Marshall Township will be receiving essentially half of what we would have, and less than we would have if the land had stayed in our jurisdiction and under our tax rolls.
So then the correct understanding is not only is Ford getting, hundreds of millions of dollars from the state, they are also receiving hundreds of millions of dollars through the 50% tax abatement.
Correct.
That is a good point there, because that creates a budgetary shortfall. When a company comes into the township, they don't have to pay their full amount, but other companies are paying their taxes. Millages have to be increased on the rest of the surrounding community. They have to pay more in order to make up for the money that they aren't paying because they got a special deal. That's not fair to the small businesses in the community who have to pay the full rate, is it?
No. And I think just as maybe an example of this, which we didn't really speak to, but our Fire Station 1 was in the way, if you will, for the utility corridor. So MEDA wanted our fire station out of the way. So the previous board swung a deal with them to basically demolish our Fire Station 1 and replace it with a new fire station, which they conveniently try to call the major campus fire station. Now, it's still in Marshall Township. It still belongs to us. But I think there's an expectation that we will carry the burden of this potential fire, right? And I'm sure you're all aware, you've seen lithium battery fires and the concerns, especially when you're within a few hundred yards of the Kalamazoo River, where there's a 27-acre reservoir to handle all the water from the Ford site. So, yeah, I mean, we're expecting an increase in costs, but not as much in revenue as we really need to handle that increase in cost.
Next question from Representative Bierlein.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. How much of that 3,000 acres has currently been cleared? If I look at your pictures, or if I look at a map,
Sure.
Google Earth or anything, how much of that has been cleared? I'm just trying to get a scope of size.
Yeah, so I can give you some geometry. Everything has been cleared to what is called 13 Mile, right? The area from 13 to 12 Mile, which would probably represent, I'm going to guess maybe 800 acres, hasn't been cleared. The houses have been raised and bulldozed. The road hasn't been abandoned yet, which goes into Ceresco. So if I had to guess, I'd say at least 1,200 acres.
Okay. How many homes have been eliminated?
Wow. It's hard to,
And I don't need, I'm just
yeah,
curious.
it's hard to say. I would,
Curiosity.
if I had to guess, I'd throw out, maybe somewhere in the neighborhood of 20 to 30. Businesses along Michigan Avenue are still in the process of being eliminated. So it's a process that's taken some time. Some were raised very quickly. For example, right next to the Township Hall, there's going to be a park and ride, right? So those houses had to go quickly. Anything that was on the Ford campus had to go immediately.
So some of the property that's set aside still that hasn't been cleared or is still there is on site, but for future development. So there's not necessarily a plan for that property yet. Is that accurate?
Correct, yeah.
Okay. And then if I may, Mr. Chair, you've mentioned the appropriation that was attached to the zoning vote or the 425 agreement vote. Do you remember like how much it was for and what it was for?
So it wasn't attached to the 425, it was attached to the rezoning. So again,
correct. So
it's a very simple process.
Yep.
I'm not saying it's trivial, but it's a very simple process of changing the zoning from agriculture to industrial I3. Shouldn't involve any appropriation. I believe, I'm going from memory, I believe it was roughly $200,000. It had no specific purpose.
So we can sometimes attach appropriations to controversial things so that they're referendum proof.
Right.
I don't know if that applies to local government.
It does in this case. So,
Okay.
so the city charter specifically calls out that city voters have the right to petition for a referendum unless there's an appropriation attached to the ordinance. So I think one can infer that it was put there purposely.
Thank you.
Good question, a little early, though. I wanted to ask the MEDC that next week. You're on top of your game a little bit too much there, Representative. But, okay, very good. My last question I have for you is Bill Ford made comments this past week bringing into question the future of the Marshall Megasite. Are you encouraged by the recent statements he's made?
Well, I think I would say I'm encouraged that the project could be stopped, and that's going to sound funny because it's 60% complete, right? However, I think right from the beginning, I think the community really didn't want this facility. It didn't want this industrial development. We still don't want it. If we win in court, the land has to be put back the way it was, which may be almost impossible, in the zoning placed back to agricultural. So I think from the standpoint, personally, that I just don't believe in incentives for anything, including electric vehicles. So I'm encouraged that actually the U.S. government is considering it. And I think in terms of Ford, I know the company fairly well. I would have guessed at the beginning that they probably would never open this plant. And the reason I say that is that their ability to compete with the overheads that they have is very difficult. Some of you probably remember Visteon, which was a spin-off of Ford Parts and Service. You remember Delphi, which was a spin-off of AC Delco. Those subsidiaries failed. I think it's very difficult for a company like Ford to compete in this particular market, especially if you consider UAW wages and overhead.
It certainly is frustrating that so much time, energy, and resources has been spent using taxpayer dollars to destroy a community like yours for a project that may not even come to fruition.
Right.
But I am encouraged that there's a chance that it may not come to fruition, and I appreciate the hard work that you and everybody else has put into shedding light on what's going on in your community there. We have another question from Representative Kowalsski.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. You had just mentioned about the subdivisions being cleared, the homes being cleared near that. What was the process like? Were those homes occupied? How did that happen?
Well, obviously, originally they were occupied.
I mean, when they were, I mean, obviously not actively being occupied while they were raised, but like how did we get to the point where they were no longer occupied and raised?
Yeah, so I think each of the contracts with each of the property owners had a time limit that they had to exit the property. And some of those were sooner than others, and as I would say as quickly as those properties that were specific to the Ford site were emptied, they were raised. C Drive, which was a road that I think Julie alluded to, was abandoned, right? Because Maida owned property on both sides of the road. So the road was abandoned by the county, and all of the houses along it were destroyed.
Okay. And then you mentioned that I think you said, I know Ford pretty well. Can you elaborate on that? How do you know Ford?
Well,
What's your
I
relationship?
worked for Ford Motor Company the first 7.5 years. I'm a licensed engineer in the state of Michigan. I also worked it's several suppliers for Ford Motor Company. So my family, many of them were employed by Ford Motor Company. So I'm well aware of Ford. I think it's a good company in many ways. I'm disappointed in their lack of investment in technology like this. If they wanted to get into EVs,
Yeah.
which I actually was part of an EV group that was part of Ballard Power Systems, which used to be part of Ford, and we worked on electric propulsion systems, but primarily for fuel cells, which is where Ford was headed. Ford put millions and millions of dollars into fuel cells, which I don't know if you've seen too many fuel cell vehicles around, but if they really needed to develop the state-of-the-art battery, they had plenty of money to do it.
So you almost finished the sentence. If they wanted to invest in this technology, they would. Is that what you were about to say?
Correct.
Thank you.
And I'm glad you brought that up too. I wish the best for Ford. You know, if they want to make a market decision to invest in a new, innovative approach towards bringing something to a product to market, then go ahead and do it. More power to you. Let's get regulations out of the way. Let's lower taxes across the board for everybody. Let's have a reliable energy grid. Let's have a good infrastructure in place. But when we make the people of Michigan fund projects, and then they need even more funding, or else they're going to threaten to shut down the whole system that they've already been preparing to bring to fruition. And unless the federal government continues to dole out more money after the state of Michigan already has given them hundreds of millions and then over $1 billion once you include their local tax abatements, and then they're going to turn around and maybe not even do it at the end of the day, we should have just let the market run its course. They never would have built this big of a project in a free market with equal opportunity. None of this would have happened if this was a market-driven decision. Does that make sense?
Correct. I agree with you 100%. And I think to back that up, I mean, the city of Marshall built an industrial park probably over 25 years ago south of town, and it remains almost empty. I think this wasn't well thought through. I think it was based on a single employer, and others will come. And I think that industry was built upon incentives, and now potentially those could unravel.
Very good. Last question from Representative Bierlein.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, for all of the opportunity today. I just want, you mentioned the plant's about 60% complete. Do you know how many people are working there on site right now, or roughly
Yeah, I think I've heard numbers like 200 people. You know, it's contractors, right? It's steel workers, it's plumbers, pipe fitters. Most of the grading, I think, is done now. A lot of the concrete work is done now. The building is enclosed. So I don't know. I mean, I'm sure it varies, but I've heard numbers like 200. I think Meta has put out, you know, quite a bit of information on.
I think they've said around 1,000, but I was just curious as to what you're seeing in the community and if
Yeah.
those folks are
I don't know that
local. Or
I think we'd
brought it?
notice if there was 1,000.
Okay. And has Ford started any pre-hiring, or they don't have a start date? And I'm just curious, compared to other projects in the going through this process right now.
Again, through Made, I've seen that, you know, Ford is actively hiring. I think their plant manager, what they call general manager, was hired from Eaton Corporation locally. He's been in place for some time. So I think, you know, all indications are that I think they're moving forward. I think you hear the same things I do, that if the incentives go away, we're probably going to go away.
All right, I don't see any more questions. My last comment I want to make is, first, I do appreciate that the MEDC, when we reach out to them and ask them to testify on these topics, they consistently respond and they consistently come in and have the conversation, whether we agree or disagree on the issues. Maida and Jim Durian, we've contacted him 10, 12 times probably, between him and reaching out to the Maida, asking Jim Durian to come in here and talk to us about what's going on at the Marshall Megasite. He refuses to respond. We're not getting an answer from him. And I'm sick and tired of it, because it's the taxpayers of Michigan who are paying so much money for these types of projects, and he gets to run these types of operations for a community that doesn't even want it. You guys are pissed. I'm pissed. We're pissed. And he doesn't even have the decency to come and talk to us about what's going on. Jim Durian needs to get in here and talk to the people. With that, I don't see any further business before the committee. We stand adjourned.